I am an artist. When I say those words, even in a recorded video like this, I get a feeling of guilt. I feel that I'm lying in some way when I say that I am an artist. And that, dear viewer, is imposter syndrome. I, like almost every single artist out there, experience imposter syndrome pretty much all the time. And I've been trying to find ways of getting rid of those voices of doubt in my head, and I've come to a single conclusion. You cannot get rid of them. But it does get a lot easier to live with if you do repeatable actions, and that's what we're going to talk about. My theory is that the more we do things, the better we get at them. I think that's true of most things, but there are some things that we never really get better at because we just don't do them. And usually what stops us are negative thoughts like fear and doubt. And you can get better at living with imposter syndrome, but you have to put your reps in. As an artist, you may be getting in your own way, and that could be slowing your progress down. Not just in terms of your skill level, but in terms of the opportunities that you allow to pass you by because you don't think you deserve them. The real kicker is that imposter syndrome is a self-fulfilling prophecy. Imagine that you're in a room full of 30 other artists and a job offer comes up. One job to produce artwork for Marvel Comics. You've always dreamed of being a comic artist, and getting this job would be a huge deal for you. But you look at the other artists in the room and think that you're not as good as them. You convince yourself that you wouldn't get the job over the majority of the other artists, and so you don't apply for the job. And now that job has gone to one of the other artists. Hey, you were right. You didn't get the job and someone else in the room did, which must mean that they were better than you, which must mean that you were right not to go for it. That is the trick that imposter syndrome plays, and if you give into it, it will control you. So how do you control it? You may have heard elsewhere that there's no way of getting rid of imposter syndrome, and I believe that. I said it as part of the intro to this video. It will be with you forever, and it will come in many different forms throughout your life. But I do believe that you can control it, and the way to control it is through repeated actions. But one action you don't need to repeat is hitting that subscribe button, because then you'll unsubscribe. If we go back to that room full of 30 artists, and instead of sabotaging our chances of landing that job with Marvel Comics, we instead apply. Even if the outcome is the same and someone else gets the job, we have made an action that we can control and, more importantly, repeat. By allowing yourself to be a little bit vulnerable by putting yourself out there, it will make the next decision that you have to make a little easier. Remember, one of the biggest weapons that imposter syndrome has against you is stopping you from even trying. So if you practice starting things like applying for positions or opportunities or starting an ambitious new project, then you're strengthening your defenses against imposter syndrome. For me, one of the biggest things I've ever done is start this YouTube channel. It didn't even cross my mind that I could even make a channel, or that I should. I'm not outgoing enough, I'm not charming enough, and I'm not talented enough to start a YouTube channel. These are all the things that imposter syndrome was telling me, and I listened. So I didn't make a channel. But then I did. So what changed? Well, for me, it was largely thanks to the spotlight effect. The spotlight effect is a social phenomenon where we believe we're being noticed more than we actually are. We think we have this spotlight on us at all times and think that everyone can see us both internally and externally. They see our doubts, our fear, our insecurities, and it's only a matter of time before they figure us out as the charlatans that we are. But that's not reality, and it's not rational. Once I understood this concept, that it wasn't just me that was being affected by this, then it helped me gain the courage to actually start the YouTube channel in the first place. And one of the main things that I've realized over the past year is that nothing bad has happened. All of my worst fears were not realized, which gave me the courage to make the next video and the next one and so on and so forth until we're here today. Imposter syndrome tends to stop us from starting, which is why it can be so debilitating. And by ignoring that impulse to run or say no to something, and instead practice starting something like accepting an opportunity or a commission or a project, then we can start building momentum to say yes to the next thing. I think one of the key factors to consider when you're combating your own imposter syndrome is that you're not alone. The majority of us feel imposter syndrome in one way or another, and we all deal with it in different ways. The good news is that it gets easier to live with provided you give yourself enough self-care and attention. A common piece of advice that you may have heard someone give to you when you're feeling particularly anxious about something is, what's the worst thing that could happen? As well-meaning as that piece of advice is, it's actually pretty horrible to ask someone who's feeling anxious that question, because they're going to answer it. What's the worst thing that could happen? Well, people will look at me, they'll judge me, I might say something that will offend someone, I might fall over, I might accidentally shit myself, and I'll forever be remembered as the person who fell over, offended everyone, and then shat himself. See, you're not actually supposed to answer that question. It's supposed to be rhetorical. So let's change the question and instead make it a statement that cannot be argued with. If you're faced with a decision or a choice that might make you feel vulnerable and trigger those voices of doubt, then simply state to yourself this: I am going to do this. There's no arguing with that. I was approached to do a graphic facilitation job late last year, and my instinct was to say no. And the reason was because of imposter syndrome. I've never done it before, I'm not good enough at drawing, and I'll draw badly anyway because I'll be nervous. These are the things that I was telling myself, and I'd basically already decided that it was going to go badly before I'd even tried. And that's why I said no. Then I took away my ability to make a choice and stated to myself, I am going to do this. Nothing more, nothing less. Whether it went well or badly was no longer a consideration. I didn't have to imagine what might happen, I just had to state, I am going to do this. Now, for full disclosure, I haven't done the job yet, although it is coming up at some point, and it might have gone really badly by the time that you're watching this, but that's not the point. The point is to say yes to opportunities if the reason you're saying no is because of imposter syndrome. Every time you say yes, it's a small victory, and the influence of imposter syndrome lessens over time. And to be honest, I felt imposter syndrome creeping in while I was making this video. I've already made a video on imposter syndrome, but that was mostly me talking about the definitions and the different types of imposter syndrome. So it didn't feel as personal, whereas this one does. And because of that, it's made me feel quite vulnerable. And another reason why those voices of doubt were quite strong was because of this guy. This charming, funny, wonderful artist made a video on imposter syndrome, and like many of his videos on mental health, it was very good. He explains things in ways that just punch right through to the point, and he has such amazing experiences that he can personally draw from to help illustrate his point. I thought, I can't compete with that. I can't do a better job than he can. My face looks fatter now that I've shaved. That mode of thinking has stopped me from doing videos in the past. The real tragedy is that I don't even remember what those videos were supposed to be, because I'd already made up my mind that I was not the right person to make them, or I wasn't ready. Don't get me wrong, they may have been awful, but they might have been great, and I'll never know. In this case, what stopped me from listening to those voices of doubt that were comparing a video that I hadn't even made yet to one from a successful and insightful creator was the statement, I am going to do this. I was no longer comparing my video to his, or anyone else's for that matter, because that was no longer the goal, and it never should have been. The goal was to start, and once I started, that gave me that small victory that I needed to help me continue through, and that enabled me to make this video specifically. And that's the thing with imposter syndrome. The battles you have with it are specific. There's not usually a one-size-fits-all approach to dealing with it because it depends on your particular battle. But what I hope this video can do is equip you with something that can help you press forwards the next time that imposter syndrome feels overwhelming. The reality is that you'll have to find multiple ways of dealing with it, but know that you can deal with it. It's not easy, but it's entirely possible. Imposter syndrome can impact us in more ways than I've gone through in this video, and if it really affects you, then consider seeking professional help. And consider subscribing, because I talk about comics, but I also talk about this sort of stuff as well, because being an artist is hard. And a big part of that hardship are the mental hurdles that we are all trying to jump. So thanks again for watching, and as always, have fun drawing.